So, Olga, thank you for having us with you and to speaking for Newsmax Balkans. And we saw across Europe, we are seeing a clear revival of nuclear energy right now. What's driving this shift, and why are so many countries investing in the nuclear power right now? Again.
Thanks so much for having me on. I think it's important to reflect back on the last couple of decades of where nuclear energy has been. If we look at 1990s, Europe actually took up to one third of its energy from nuclear. It's a very significant portion. But then there was this push to try to minimize, to turn towards renewables, to look towards additional natural gas. And unfortunately, that meant for many countries, including Germany, turn away from nuclear meant more Russian natural
Mhm.
gas. So Europe ended up, halving its capacity, its nuclear energy capacity to supplying from 30% to 15% recently. But it is encouraging to see that over the last several years, particularly the last 5 years or so, this conversation has changed because now nuclear is not reviving because it's nuclear, but because it provides a low carbon, reliable base load power. And it provides countries options in a very
Mhm.
volatile world where we constantly are facing either geopolitical upheavals or some kinds of choke points or supply disruptions. So countries are trying to optimize where the energy sources are coming from,
Mhm.
trying to optimize what they can do, what kind of homegrown developments they could do. And nuclear will continue playing an increasingly important role in both energy security, energy supplies, energy affordability, but also as a broader competitiveness industrial strategy. And as we get into talking about AI development and
Mhm.
other innovation, nuclear energy will be essential towards that kind of economic growth.
Yeah, as you mentioned, how significant and important is nuclear energy right now in Europe, as Europe works toward decarbonization and a greater energy security, as you mentioned. Where do you see nuclear energy alongside as wind and solar energy right now? Can those technologies truly complement to each other?
Great question. And I think Europe has had to grapple with this question on how do you balance the three pillars of low carbon decarbonization pathway, of the security pathway, but also the affordability question as well. And nuclear complements all of these three pillars, and
Mhm.
particularly the renewables development too. It doesn't compete with solar and wind. In a way, it actually enhances how much solar and wind you can add to the grid because it provides base load power that's essential for safe grid management. That's really important when you have intermittent sources.
Mhm.
So pairing renewables, batteries, and nuclear is going to enhance any strategies Europe or the different nations across Europe have to decarbonize in a
Yeah.
secure way.
Yeah, let's look like into Republic of Serbia. Turning to our country, the country has recently announced plans to develop the civilian nuclear program, and it's a really big deal for our country. Like while energy cooperation has also become part of the new U.S. and Serbia strategic dialogue. From your perspective, how significant could this be for Serbia, for our country, and maybe in the long-term energy future?
Nuclear has tremendous potential in strengthening bilateral or even regional relationships because it's not a 5 or a 10 or even a 20-year type of contract. We're talking about a 100-year relationship. And that's why countries that are choosing nuclear partners need to really think about it in terms of the long-term basis, not in terms of the short term of what even the cost breakdown of what that will look like in not just reliable partnerships, but reliable relationships on supply chains, operations, a country that they want to maintain strong relations
Mhm.
with for the next 100 years. So this is an incredible, a unique opportunity to strengthen U.S. Serbia ties, but I know that Serbia is also looking at some of the other,
Mhm.
and some of the other partners in Europe. So really taking a step back and thinking about this, not what this would look like in a 5-10 years, but this broader cooperation that could actually spill over into a broader economic partnership on, as we saw, the strategic dialogue wasn't just on energy, it included space, it included conversations on critical minerals,
Mhm.
AI, and other cooperation. So this is just a great foot in the door to bolster all of these key areas and key initiatives that Serbia and US can be working on together.
Yeah, exactly. Some experts here argue that if Serbia combines actually new hydropower projects, solar energy, or even eventually nuclear power, it could become a regional energy leader, exactly. And if that's a realistic vision we saw right now, or in your opinion, is that like realistic vision, or is it still a very long way off?
I think it's an opportune time for countries to build out their energy capacity. And what we have seen, especially in the last 5 years, is how quickly different projects and things and interconnectors can get done during crisis time. Now,
Mhm.
how do we take that type of crisis speed and actually use it, I would say at times of when there isn't a crisis, but we see that the threats are still there on the background, the choke points are
Mhm.
still there, Russia's war on Ukraine is still there. Those things, are still in the background, still are impacting the broader energy security conversation around Europe. So really thinking about, how do you build out as a country both a national policy, but also the interconnections that when you do build out additional capacity, whether it's from hydro, whether it's from nuclear or other sources, or you're a part of the broader conversation around the vertical
Mhm.
corridor and how build out in connections with North Macedonia, with Romania to be a part of that discussion. I think it's just as much of the interconnections, a regional conversation as it is a homegrown capacity. Because when you think from the market perspective of what drives these projects, it really comes down to can the developer, can the investors make money? And so in order to do that, they need to have some kind of a demand signal. So someone has to be purchasing that energy for the foreseeable future. So once you have that demand figured out and who is going to be buying off this new capacity,
Mhm.
you start looking at the bureaucratic regulatory environment and making sure that there aren't, regulations in the way that are not value add, that are just kind of adding paperwork without adding specific, whether it's environmental or other values to assessing the projects. And then again, it's really thinking through on how do you have a market that can send the right signals to where the energy is produced across Europe at the lowest cost and sending it to where it's, I mean, this is a very simplified way of saying it, but how do you have the least cost production of energy sent to the regions, to the countries that need it most? So when we think about Serbia's future as a hub, as a provider of that, the market conditions, the regulatory environment, the financing, the political environment, all of these things play a huge role. And when it comes to nuclear, because it is so it's such a regulatory and a financially intensive project. It's such a capital intense
Mhm.
project, such a bureaucratically and safety for the right reasons intense project. It does require very close cooperation between the public and the private sectors.
Yeah, so Serbia can learn from our neighbors, from Croatia and Slovenia, and also from Hungary. They have a nuclear plants all across their countries. So one final question will be, if Serbia decides to move forward with nuclear energy, what do you think would be the biggest benefits for our Balkan region, so we can spread, as you mentioned, this energy to North Macedonia, to Montenegro, and all countries across the Balkans? What will be the benefits, in your opinion?
Optionality, because in today's world, it's so beneficial and it saves you a lot of money to have
Mhm.
options. Because when you don't have options, you are, either the quality of life of your citizens suffers, or you're suffering economically because you're purchasing energy from very, high expensive alternative options. So increasing that optionality for yourself as a country, as a region as well, is going to create a huge competitive advantage
Mhm.
too, in terms of, whether it's attracting data centers, whether it's attracting other industries. There is, tremendous, workforce across Serbia, very talented, highly educated. So thinking through of, being this innovation hub, not just in AI, but across other technologies and across other developments, having the energy to fuel these types of innovation is going to be increasingly important. And as we think about the region and Southeast Europe, the Western Balkans integrating further with Europe, with the EU, thinking through the long-term plans for that, having a strong, reliable energy base is going to be a very, very appealing, very beneficial, symbiotic relationship with the broader European Union.
Thank you, Olga, for having Newsmax Balkans, and thank you for speaking for us.
Thanks so much for having me on.